So what's up people, and welcome to another Alita Battle Angel video. So recently I finally finished the Alita Battle Angel official novelization. And as you can imagine from my comments, this was not an easy read to finish. It took a little bit of effort to be able to get to the end. And so what I wanted to do is give my opinions and review of this novel. Now from my comments that I've made, you probably think that I'm going to give this a negative review. And I have to admit that there are a lot of issues I have with this novel. But overall, I do feel that it was a book worth reading. And depending upon the style of writing that you like, you may actually like this novel a lot more than I did. And so I'll try to focus on the things that I had a concern with, and maybe you will find that those concerns are not important for your, reading pleasure. So please take my review with a grain of salt. Now, as you know, the Alita Battle Angel novel is the official novelization of the Alita Battle Angel movie, and both are based upon the Gunmu comic series. It is a novel written by Pat Cadigan, who also wrote the prequel to Alita Battle Angel, which was called Iron City. And she is a pretty well-known science fiction writer, I guess. I haven't read any of her other works, but she has won several awards, including the Arthur C. Clarke Award, as well as the Hugo Award. And so she seems to be pretty well-known in the science fiction writing community. And just like with my review of the Iron City novel, I do find that she is a very competent writer in terms of science fiction stories. As I mentioned in the past, if you look at a lot of science fiction stories, whether they're Isaac Asimov, Arthur C. Clarke, Ray Bradbury, many of these writers, oftentimes many of the stories are based upon, logic and thought-provoking stories. They're often not very visceral. They're not very action-packed, except in maybe a large-scale space battle sort of situation. And you don't get a lot of personality in terms of passion. You get a lot of personality in terms of logic for many of these science fiction stories. And because of that, I probably have some concerns with regards to how this story is written, mostly because, as you know, for anybody who has gone to the Alita Battle Angel movie or has read the Gunmu manga series, whether in Japanese or in the Battle Angel Alita English version, or any other language for that matter, you know that the story is extremely action-packed and it's also very empathic, with logic actually taking a back seat to many of the adventures that happen, which kind of stir your soul rather than your brain. And as such, although this is a science fiction story, this is more akin towards a Star Wars type of adventure rather than a Star Trek type of science fiction. Now, before I continue, I would like to give my quick spoiler alert. Because this is a review that is intended for people who have watched the movie and who may be considering whether this book would be worth reading in supplement to the movie, I am going to go into a lot of the details of the movie, assuming that you have already known the story of Alita Battle Angel. And because of that, if you have not watched the movie, then I would suggest to go watch the movie and then look at this review with regards to whether or not you would like to read the novel. Now, if you have read the novel, then yeah, you don't really need to see the movie if you have not, because of the fact that, of course, I will be covering mostly things that are going into the novel, although I will every once in a while infer to how some of the stories in the novel may be referencing things that may be coming out in the future based upon the source material. Anyway, so that is my spoiler alert, and you can determine whether or not you want to continue on with this video. But if you don't mind me going over a lot of the information, then please join us. Anyway, so yeah, overall, I do have to admit, I think Pat Cadigan is a very good writer. The only thing I will have to say is this is the type of story that she probably is not typically used to writing. She is probably more closer to writing things that are like, Arthur C. Clarke's stories, such as Childhood's End or Rendezvous with Rama, 2001. Or Isaac Asimov's stories such as I, Robot or Foundation. And for those types of stories, I think she would be an absolutely good writer. But for this one, once again, because this falls behind on the logic side and goes into a lot of the passion side, I found that she probably is not familiar with this sort of territory, and although she tried to do her best in portraying the story as compassionate as possible, there is a feeling that the story feels a lot more colder, a lot more grayer than the colorful feeling that you got from the movie, as well as, of course, the incredible amount of compassion that you get from the manga series. And once again, that will be the reason why I say it depends on what your preference is. If you don't mind Alita Battle Angel being told in a setting that is similar to something like The Foundation, then you may find this story to be okay. But just like with the Iron City novel and the concern I had with this, I also had a concern with this novel because of the fact that it takes a much more colder, less heartening approach than a lot of the other mediums such as the movie, the anime, or the original manga. And since that is one part of the manga I loved so much was its compassion, despite it being a cyberpunk violent science fiction series, I found that to be very lacking in this novel. And so now if I compare the Iron City novel to this one, in the Iron City novel, I didn't feel that problem to be as much of an issue compared to this one. And that's not because of the fact that this novel is less compassionately written, but more of a fact that I have not read the plot of the Iron City novel until the novel, whereas with the Alita Battle Angel novel, of course I've read it multiple times, whether it's in the manga, or it's in the anime, or it's in the movie. So you get to see it over and over again in the different perspectives. And so when you get to this novel, like I said, I had a difficulty getting through this novel because of the fact that you already knew the story, and so there was no pull in trying to see what's going to happen next, and yet you didn't have the compassion and the feeling that you got from the other mediums that made you want to read the story for that feels sort of situation. And so for my perspective, I found this book to be not easy to read. It took several weeks. Part of it was because, again, it just didn't feel right compared to a lot of the other mediums. But the other one is every once in a while you would compare it to the other stories, and some of it would get me quite upset. But again, I don't think this is really a fault of Pat Cadigan, in a sense that I think she tried to do her very best in portraying what she had, despite the fact that, first of all, she isn't, again, familiar with this sort of writing style. But second, I don't think she had a chance to really read up on the Ganmu storyline. And yet, there are information in there that I feel that she did try to read as much as possible, because some of it I find it to be very good. And what's interesting is, within all the difficulties that I had reading this book, every once in a while there was some really, really brilliant story writing, which made me feel like, wow, now this is well done. And that gave me a little bit more addition to the other mediums, whether it was the anime, the movie, or the manga, in that, wow, this is a very different perspective, and you kind of added to that and gave you some additional supplement to some of the other mediums that you had. So this isn't just a deja vu of a lot of the other stories that is kind of written in a colder perspective, but there are points in here that I thought was very well written. One example of this is in the very beginning of the story, when Daisonito brings, Alita's original head and torso back to rebuild her up again. And although Pat Cadigan has a harder time expressing feelings through the conversation or the thoughts that that character may have, I found this one to be very good based upon the expression that this character portrayed. And what I'm talking about is, during the operation, Nurse Gerhardt notices that Daisonito is actually crying while he's actually doing the operation. And he's rushing through all of this, and so, of course, Nurse Gerhardt, being Nurse Gerhardt, doesn't, bring that point up, but she did find it to be very interesting because of course, the fact that this is, in Daisonito's mind, his Alita, right? His daughter. And so that was quite well done. Again, I think she's trying to find ways of being able to show expression of feeling. Although you don't particularly see it in the thought patterns that each of these characters have when you read them, you do see it every once in a while in what you might call blunt expressions that may come out. One of the more enjoyable and noticeable ones that I found to be very good in writing was a dream sequence that Hugo had. And this was after, of course, Alita got ripped apart by Grushka, and many of the situations going on. If I recall, it was after, Alita basically offered her heart, and he said not to trust anyone. And after that, I think it was after that, that he has this dream sequence. And this dream sequence is about him going after Kinuba. You remember the motorball racer? And of course, jacking him and taking him apart. But in that dream, of course, after he takes him apart, he looks down, and it turns out to be not Kinuba he's looking at, but Alita, who's been taken apart. And Alita looks up at him and said, if I recall, something like, didn't I tell you that I would give you everything? Or something like that. And it horrifies Hugo to the point that, of course, he wakes up. And the reason I like that is because that then gives you some idea of all the pent-up feelings that he has started getting, such as the fact that it was the grind cutters that he basically jacked that gave Grushka the ability to rip Alita apart, and the fact that he is jacking cyborgs while the person that he cares for is actually a cyborg. All of that started adding together. And I could see him having a dream like this. And then I could understand why then he would turn around and stop being a jacker, which would then lead to that Tanji situation. And so I thought that this was really well written. And again, this is with situation rather than with expression of feeling that you get a little bit more depth into the story. So, yes, there are some very good writing points in this novel. And that does make up for a lot of some of the other issues that I've had. Coming back to some of the problems, there's a couple of other ones that I found. One of them is the fact that I felt that she often portrayed many of these characters as either dark or light. There is no middle ground, right? And that was a difficulty I had because of the fact that I've always liked Ganmu because of the conflict of good and bad, I guess you want to say it, anger and love within each one of these characters. No one single character was ever pure evil or pure good. And the conflict was very much something that I've always enjoyed in the comic. And I found that to be a little bit lacking in the movie, but it wasn't nowhere near as noticeable as what you see in the novel. The novel is very binary. If you're evil, you are evil. If you're good, you are good. If you're angry, you're angry. If you're happy, you're happy. And probably one of the best examples of this is right after the motorball scene when Hugo gets attacked by Zapan. Now, of course, Alita comes up to defend him. And at that time, Alita first notices that Hugo is a wanted criminal. And during that time, of course, she does have that anger and strikes the ground, but it is a conflicted anger between her care for him and the fact that she has felt that she's been betrayed. And you could see that conflict throughout that entire movie, especially by the expressions that Rosa Salazar brought out, which I thought was very well done. But in the novel, one of the problems I have is that it's, again, kind of binary. She goes from loving him to hating him to loving him. You know, you get to the point where she's absolutely defending Hugo when Zapan attacks him. She finds out that Hugo was a criminal, and all of a sudden this all glaring rage and anger comes out, and there's like all these negative thoughts coming out of her. There is no conflict, there's just sheer negative thoughts. And then the next thing you know, of course, Zapan stabs him, and then she runs, takes Hugo into the church, and when she's in the church, she's back to her positive thoughts again. And so there's this feeling of where is the conflict, where is this internal conflict of her anger and her love that was so well expressed in the movie. And those are the types of areas that I found to be very hard to read. The other thing that I found to be very difficult is that since this is an action-packed adventure, the novelization, you would hope, expresses that action very well with words. But once again, since I feel that Pat Cadigan is much more adept at writing Asimov or Arthur C. Clarke type of, very political logic, high-level sort of stories, then when it comes to the action, it feels very anemic. And sometimes it doesn't even exist, where all of a sudden you see the beginning of the confrontation or you read about the beginning of the confrontation and then immediately switches to the end of the confrontation where the person is down. And because of that, you're feeling like there's very little action in the story. Now, what's interesting is at the latter part, after Motorball, you feel it become a lot better. Motorball, I found it to be quite anemic. And I know the author was trying to write as much as possible, but considering the fact that that was the area where she really needed to have her movements and, battle actions well laid out, it was not really well done, in my opinion. The arm positions, for the hip positions that are necessary to do a specific move. None of that was done. And I got a feeling that probably Pat Cadigan has not done too much martial arts, and maybe that's one of the reasons. But I did feel a lot of it being lacking. But for some reason, I found the latter parts to be better. I'm not exactly sure why. And maybe it's because it was just flowing better rather than that she started writing the action better. I'm not exactly sure. But yeah, that was one of the other things that I found lacking in this novel. I didn't feel it as much in the Iron City novel because of the fact that I never expected Iron City to be that much action-packed. But this one had to be. And as we all know, Yukito Kishiro is so good at writing and drawing his actions that even in a written medium, you felt that the action existed. I mean, Alita's fighting sequences in the manga are phenomenal. And that is something that I just felt was lacking in this novel. Now, as far as character portrayal, I have a mixed feeling with regards to this. I think some of the characters were actually really well done. I liked Hugo, and I thought that being able to go into Hugo's mind was good because of the fact that there was this difference in thought between whether he could exploit Alita so that he could go to Zalem versus how he was falling for Alita, and the character portrayal of people like Dyson Ito and especially Nurse Gerhardt I thought was really well done. I also liked Tanji and Shiren and Koyomi, but I had a seriously negative feeling with regards to Vector. And once again, this comes back because of the black and white binary feeling of this novel. Vector was one of the most complex characters in the Battle Angel Alita comic, and I loved him for his complexity, and yet there is no multifacet in Vector in the novel. It's something that I was a little bit worried about in the movie, but you really weren't sure because, Vector wasn't really well expressed in the movie. He just didn't have too much time to portray himself. But in the novel, you get to go into his mind, and my gosh, this guy is a shallow character. And that was really disappointing. Okay, so with all that said, you would think that I would hate this novel. But there are some really good points with regards to this novel. First of all, as I mentioned in the Iron City novel, it was really nice to hear about Hugo's backstory, his family, and of course, the situation that happened with his brother. That happened in the Iron City novel. And it was really nice to see one of these official storylines for Alita Battle Angel, either the movie or the novel, going over Hugo's backstory. But in this one, there are some other points that are very well brought up. And one of them is Hugo going completely crazy right after he's received his robot body and listening to Dyson Nito and Alita talk about there's just no way for people to go up to Zalem, that it was all a scam. Now, this is exactly the way it happened in the manga, and it was really nice to see it done in the novel. And the way they wrote it in the novel was really good, and the sense that he felt extremely not only betrayed, but he felt so idiotic because of the fact that he spent his entire life and threw all his ethics away just to find out that it was a scam, and how much of a idiot he was. And the way they did it in the novel, I thought was really well done. Also, another thing that I enjoyed was Alita's battle with the Centurions when she was going after Vector. And in that part, why I found it to be good is, although this is an action part and you would think I would be criticizing that, one of the things you realize is something that I've always wondered about when watching the movie. If you notice, she kills those, or she destroys those centurions, not by basically blasting them to pieces, but by one single strike to the middle of its head. And I always wondered, why does that really take a centurion down? And is there some really reason for doing that? Is there some brain or something associated in that area? And the novel confirms that. Now, it doesn't say brain, it says brain case, which can indicate that it is maybe something like the brain chip, but regardless of whether it's a brain and the centurions are cyborgs, or it's some sort of brain case, a mechanical version, and it's an android, it is a surgical strike that Alita does to these centurions that takes them out. And I was really glad to see the novel actually go out of its way to portray that. And the final thing that made me really, really redeem the novel was the discussion that Hugo had in the church after he got stabbed in the stomach. Now, it's basically the same thing that happened in the movie, but the reason why I liked it, and I can't say, I'm not exactly sure whether it's good writing or not, but it was a great reveal, is he's kind of starts laughing and thinking to himself, the stupidest things that you think about right before you die is what he's thinking about, right? And then he starts blurting out to Alita this kind of off-the-wall discussion or comment that probably Alita's like, what the heck are you talking about? But he's like, you see, I have always wondered, looking at the sky while I was in this church, why that one single star up there in the sky never moves when all the other ones do. And finally, under this situation, for some reason, I finally realized what it is. There is a structure up there, way up in the sky, that must be part of this entire megastructure that is stationary to where we are. And of course, what he's talking about is the orbital ring, and potentially Jiru. And so what I liked about it is like, oh my gosh, they're talking about Jiru, because throughout this entire movie and the speculation and all that, you never were sure if there was ever going to be anything beyond Zalem. You did get that speech from Gruishka, who said, there are layers upon layers of worlds, but you were never sure if those layers ended with Zalem. But with this speech, it more than indicates that there really is a structure up there. And if there is, then there is potentially going to be a Jiru. And if that's the case, then that opens up a lot of speculation to what you expect in the sequels, because it could even potentially bring about Merlin, the Melchizedek, as well as possibly Embody, right? And Ladder, and all the other things that come out later on that you were not sure if they were even going to talk about in this movie. So I hope that will continue on. And I thank Pat Cadigan for bringing this into the novelization so that readers who read the manga can feel like, wow, there is a good possibility that the movie series is going to go in the same direction as the manga. Okay, so that's about it for my review of the Alita Battle Angel novelization. And if you have read the novel, what did you think about it? How did you feel about a lot of the things that came out in the novel? And did you find it to be an easy read, a comfortable read, or did you find it to be a difficult read? And as always, thank you very much in advance, because I always appreciate your comments. Anyway, I'll keep on going with more Alita Battle Angel videos in the future. I hope you join me at that time. In fact, what I want to do next week is the Vector video, because this novel really upset me more than anything, with the vector character portrayal, that I did want to make a video with regards to that. So I hope you join me at that time. But in any case, until then, happy anime watching, happy movie watching, happy novel reading, and as always, Jaya, nice day, everyone.